Hi, and welcome to our second remote edition of the Cinetopia podcast. This is our first attempt at video broadcast and premiere. We're checking down a little bit this time to go live, but hopefully in the next one we'll try it or soon enough. I'm here with Jim Ross, a fellow producer of the Cinetopia podcast and managing editor of Take One magazine. Jim, how's it going? Lots of reviews, lots of films I hear.
Yep. I've probably watched more shows, to be honest. Like, I did a disappointing amount of film watching from me. I think there'd be a lot of people who would be a bit surprised at how little I'm actually managing to get through. But we've watched quite a lot for the show. I was quite fond of some of them, and lots of recommendations to come. Not from all of us, I don't think, but we'll get to that when it comes.
Right. And I'm also here with Mark Nelson, freelance film critic, regular contributor to our show as well. Mark, how are you today?
Yeah, not too bad, Amanda. I'm furloughed for the foreseeable, so I've got time to split between reading and watching as many movies as it turns out I was watching before lockdown anyway, so it's not too bad.
So has it gone up or gone down?
It's about the same. It's about the same. I was managing 2 or 3 movies a day anyhow, so yeah, it's round about the same.
Mark would be one of those people who was disappointed in me, basically. 2 or 3 films a day. I'm not hitting those numbers. Let's just say that.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I guess the biggest news out in the industry is the announcement of this We Are One Global Film Festival. I think it's mostly curated by the Tribeca Film Festival, Jane Rosenthal. What do you guys make of this? That means Cannes is supposedly somewhat on it, but I hear that it's mostly films, maybe not the big blockbuster films that they were planning. What do you guys think about this?
I think it's definitely interesting. I don't personally think it'll be something that'll persist much beyond this year. I think this is probably a sort of a bit of a band-aid on the whole thing, just because so many festivals are being uprooted, moved. There's a bunch that have been moved to different dates so far, but I'd be surprised if they stay on some of those dates. So it's refreshing. It's a good way to see some of the newer, smaller films, which, if I'm being honest, tend to be the ones that I'm interested in from Cannes anyway. Like, I like the big ones as much as anyone else, but it's more the small ones that seem to, come out of nowhere later in the year for a lot of people, where, like, you'll find they were in some, like, random little strand in Cannes or something. So it's interesting. I don't think it'll go beyond this year, but I think it's a good way to get these films out there, because there's a debate to be had as to whether they got much exposure at the likes of Cannes anyway, when you've got all the blockbusters and the sort of like the big art house beasts kicking around anyway. But
that's true, and I also find the way that a number of online festivals have been run, it's usually domain locked. So I'm glad that this one's going to be on YouTube and supposedly free, as far as I can tell. But the words Cannes involvement do tantalize me somewhat, because there are a few movies that I'm very much hoping to see, and if they end up on there as their premiere, instead of being kicked back to 2021 or 2022, that would be delightful.
What are those films?
I was thinking the 2 that I'm really looking forward to are Memoria by Pichapongwe Sethekal, and the other one is it's called Bergman's Island, I think. It's by Mia Hansen-Lova. Those are the 2 that I'm very much hoping might end up there. If they don't, I won't be heartbroken. I'm being realistic, but there's an off chance maybe.
But they're not going to push the films back to a Cannes release a whole year, are they? Was that the idea?
Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, let's be perfectly honest here. Some of the films that come out of Cannes, like, if you're not at Cannes, you need to wait like the best part of a year to get them anyway. I mean, I realised there were previews and stuff anyway, but it was February before we got Parasite here. It was late February before we got Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and they were both in Cannes like the previous May or something. So
the Whistlers we're talking about today, and
exactly. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of these things where if depending on who picks them up and where you live, you can be waiting ages for these things anyway. Like, we reviewed what was it, By the Grace of God on the show like a wee while ago, and that was out at the Berlinale, and I didn't see it until like late 2019. We've had these discussions before on the show. Like, I'm a big fan of anything that increases access to these films, and I think this is another way of doing it. I don't think this is one that will persist, as I've said, but yeah, I'm a fan of it. I think it's a good idea.
Great. And that starts in the 29th. So keep a lookout for that, and we'll keep you updated on more information that we hear about it. So today we'll be reviewing 4 films and series, starting with the new Star Wars series available on the new Disney Plus streaming service called The Mandalorian. Then we'll be reviewing The Whistlers, which Mark mentioned was at Cannes last year, and it was directed by the acclaimed Romanian director. And Mark, could you please pronounce that gentleman's name for me?
Sure. Corneliu Porumboiu.
Yeah, I tried like 5 times before we started and I couldn't get it, but I have actually seen him in real life at Berlinale for another film. So and I think like you said, this film was in Cannes last year, so we'll be reviewing that. And then Mark and Jim will also be reviewing the Irish film Calm the Horses, directed by Nick Rowland. And last but not least, we'll be reviewing Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, written and directed by Eliza Hittman. Originally, it premiered at Sundance, but it was also this year's Berlinale Silver Bear Grand Jury Prize winner, I believe. And finally, I'll be sharing an interview I did with John Watzke, who's a longtime projectionist and owner of the Ocala Drive-In Theater, which for a few weeks was the only cinema in the US which was showing new releases, accounting for the only box office sales reporting during that time. We'll talk to him, or I talked to him about how his drive-in has flourished during these crazy times, and some new safety measures that he's put in place, but also the general experience of drive-in movies. Plus we'll be doing our short film recommendations as we always do. And on this one, I'm asking one of the 2 of you to dare us to watch a film that's online right now that we can all see and review next time. So, one of those films you want to rewatch, or you want to dare us to try to. So that's all that we're going to be doing this episode of Cinetopia. So let's get going.
Is the world more peaceful since the revolution? It is a shame that your people suffered. But bounty hunting is a complicated profession. They said you were coming. They said you were the best in the parsec. Would you agree?
Okay, so the first series that we're actually going to review today is Mandalorian, which is on the Disney Plus streaming. And Jim, how long has the Disney Plus been? I got my 7-day trial so we could check this out, and I think one of the things we're kind of doing is looking at what streaming platforms are out there and sort of analyzing that as well. How long has this been out for the UK? Do you know?
So for the UK, it's not that long. I think as we speak now, it's maybe 2 or 3 weeks, perhaps. Might be more than that, actually. It was basically, like, part of its popularity, I think, in terms of sign-ups, is because I think it happened just as the lockdown happened. So it's about a month, maybe, something like that. It must be something like that, because they launched with 3 episodes of this, The Mandalorian, and then they've released them 1 a week after that. They are now all available, hence the timing of this review, along with the whole May the 4th thing, which I hate because it's a pun, but, whatever. We've got a Star Wars theme, let's just go with it. So yeah, it's been around for about a month, something like that. But it's been going in the States since November. So this show has actually been available in the States since about the whole thing by mid-December, something like that. But it's only just hit here.
All right. Well, to be honest, I liked Star Wars when I was younger, but I haven't probably seen a Star Wars film in 10 years. Right around when Natalie Portman was highlighted a lot. But I just didn't know, when you suggested us to watch this, if I would know what's going on, because it's been such a long time, and I feel like it's kind of a club. You need to know. But tell us a little bit about The Mandalorian. What is this series?
Well, I mean, I can give you a cynical description, and I can give you a non-cynical description.
No, I don't think you need to give a cynical description.
I mean, you know me by now. You're getting the cynical description. This is basically a way for them to make use of the fact that everybody likes Boba Fett without needing to worry about retconning Boba Fett from the original Star Wars films. That's it. That's the cynical take. The non-cynical take is it's the first live-action Star Wars series. They've had animated seasons before. I forget what they're all called. I think one was Clone Wars, another one's called Rebels. So they've lived on various services over the years. They're now all the ones that are canon, I think, are housed on Disney Plus. But this is the first live action one, and it is set just after, or a little while after, I think, Return of the Jedi. So it's set in between the original films from the 70s and 80s and the newer ones, which just concluded with we didn't review it on the show, so I'll give my mini review here, the absolutely dreadful The Rise of Skywalker. I know some people like it, I don't anyway. It's set in between those two, and it focuses on initially anyway, nameless bounty hunter who is from Mandalore, hence the Mandalorian, and they're kind of like a warrior clan known for, Judge Dredd style, never taking their helmet off. And basically it follows his exploits in the Star Wars universe. So there's a lot of world building going on. It's going for a slightly different tone to the films, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The lead, who you basically don't see for the entire series, is Pedro Pascal, who most people would probably know from Narcos, Game of Thrones, various other TV shows, and various supporting characters. It's probably not a spoiler at this point to say that one of the characters it's mostly puppetry, is the now famous Baby Yoda. So where the Star Wars nerds will want me to point out it's not actually Yoda, but it's a baby of the same species as Yoda, and basically it then follows the Mandalorian trying to protect this character after he saves it from being handed over to the client, played by a delightfully unexpected, I think, Werner Herzog. But that first episode sets the story in motion. Basically, it goes from there with his various misadventures across the galaxy far, far away, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the Werner Herzog thing really took me for a loop. I was, it takes me a while to get into series anyway, but then I started watching it, and I think I could see myself drifting, left and right, looking at my computer, and then I heard his voice, and I was like, what? What is this? And so, no, that was quite interesting casting there. And Baby Yoda is I like Muppets and puppets and things like that, so I just really really quite cute. So I actually found it, once I got into it, I think I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I think there's some sense of humor to it. I mean, it's not really my kind of sense of humor, but and the story propels you forward, and you want to make sure that in some aspects I enjoyed it. It's not my cup of tea. It's not something I normally would watch, but I it's well done as a series, of course, and it keeps your attention for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for better or worse, and you can interpret those who have seen like the most recent Star Wars media can interpret this as they wish, right? It's one of the better things to have come out since the Disney takeover and Star Wars kicked off again. Like, for my money, I think it's significantly better than the last film. I think it's better than that Han Solo film, which was released. I find it interesting that it's been marketed on the whole, it's meant to be a slightly more adult take, and originally this concept started as a series called Star Wars Underworld, and it was meant to focus on kind of like the criminal underbelly of the Star Wars universe. Now, it is doing that, but to make out that this has a more adult tone is a little bit false advertising. I mean, it's a little bit grimier than, the feature films have been, but it's still very, from what I can see, pretty family friendly. There's nothing any particularly explicit going on here. So anybody who's looking for a TV show that is to the Star Wars universe what Logan the film was to the X-Men universe in terms of like tone and a different approach, I think they'll be disappointed. It also doesn't really kind of go fully into some of its premises. Like it's really going for the whole space western thing, and like obviously that's been cited as an influence for Star Wars since day dot in terms of the influence on that, and like Kurosawa's films and all this sort of thing. Like, so it's all kind of like coming full circle, and you can notice in the soundtrack in particular is really going for this space western feel. Something that actually reminded me of a little bit, and it's maybe a bit of a stretch, but there are definitely overlaps, is with Joss Whedon's series Firefly, which infamously got one season and then was cancelled. I mean, nearly 20 years ago now. We're really going back to when that happened. It has some overlap with that in terms of like the feel of the show, this kind of like dusty, outlaw dominated world. I think it retreats into safe territory by the middle of the series. It very much becomes a far more conventional like Star Wars setup there. So I would have liked to have seen it do more with that, I think. It's enjoyable. I'd struggle to say that it's particularly essential or interesting. I honestly think you could probably say that about most of the new Star Wars media. I've enjoyed it, I've consumed it, and I would probably fit this in alongside that sort of basis. It does. I mean, it does have its interesting moments, but there are bits where I feel like it was stretching. I would have been interested to see what I'd have made of this as a film. I think there's quite a lot of material there, and it's also got the budget for it. It's quite an interesting production process, I find. It's one of the first things I've come across is using this sound stage, and then basically this like overhead and fully wrapped around like real-time generated scenery, so the lighting is all consistent. So a lot of the locations you see there, they're not physical ones at all. And I think that's done very well. So from a production standpoint, it's actually quite interesting. From a narrative standpoint, I mean, maybe not so much. The short review of it would be not enough Werner Herzog. I mean, honestly, the role that man has in this, I could watch him do that role all day. There is not enough of him in this role.
Well, it was great, amusing that he would even be in it, and I think you were the one who told me he had never even seen a Star Wars film before this, and just agreed to do it. I think that's worth enough to check it out. For our fan base, I think, is a little bit more of a Werner Herzog kind of fan base than a Star Wars one.
I'm a fan of Werner Herzog on several levels. I mean, for obvious directorial reasons, right? But when he pops up in these like incongruous places, like in acting roles, like he's an absolute scene stealer. He's done it in this. He did it in Jack Reacher, right? That Tom Cruise film from a few years ago, which otherwise was completely unnotable. I enjoyed it, but like he's brilliant in that as well. He plays a villain. He pops up in a random episode of Parks and Recreation. Like, honestly, like just if you want to make something instantly better, just drop Werner Herzog in to like deliver some vaguely nihilistic lines, and it will automatically make it better. Joking aside, though, I do think more of him in this show would have improved it. He is the most compelling villain presence in this to me. Like later on in the series, Giancarlo Esposito shows up, who most people will, certainly in this sort of role, most people would know as Gus Fring from Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. And he's excellent. He does an excellent job, but he appears quite late in the season. He doesn't really get much to get his teeth into. And that's when my problems start to come in with it, because it's then very obviously a setup for the second season, which will be hitting Disney Plus in October 2020. They've already finished film. It's just like it then starts to feed back into the Disney content machine. So it's more just, I think there's a lot going for this, but it's more, it depends whether, like me, you will watch something just because it's Star Wars. I think if you're looking for something new out of Star Wars, I think a big game has been spoken with this, but I don't think it's as new as perhaps has been made out.
Are you a big Star Wars fan then?
Not really. No, I mean, I'm not going to be the person on the phone going, "Well, actually, it's not Baby Yoda; it's the same species as Yoda, and it's referred to as the child." Right? That's not going to be me, right? But I do watch most I watch most Star Wars stuff, like, because obviously this is the first Star Wars TV series I've watched. I've not bothered with Rebels or Clone Wars or anything like that. I have on good authority that some of them are half decent, but I've only ever watched the films, and I've had mixed success with them. The new ones, I liked The Force Awakens. I loved The Last Jedi. I hated The Rise of Skywalker. So I have very mixed results with it. I'll watch it because they're spectacular, and they're kind of like, I don't know, I think just anybody with a fondness for cinema, like Star Wars is one of these things where it's kind of like it's an event thing, and like everybody goes to see it, and in pre-coronavirus days it was packed theaters, and it was one of these kind of like event cinema, and I think there's a lot to be
I think Harry Potter
said for it.
Was like that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I enjoy consuming them from that standpoint. I'd struggle to say I'm I wouldn't describe myself as a Star Wars fan as such, but enough to be interested in The Mandalorian.
Well, for a long time, and shout out to Steve if he's watching this, my business partner is a massive Star Wars fan, and his house is just filled with Star Wars paraphernalia and whatnot. So I definitely know. I mean, the first 3 films to me are, like they're fun. They're like, you're talking about a Western. They're genre bending themselves a bit. There's comedy. There's like, romance and whatnot. And I've just felt like it's increasingly gotten out of the films to me, over the years, or at least that's and so in this way, I think maybe the adultness is the fact that it's trying to bring that back in a bit, maybe like, the rapport with the different characters and stuff. But again, I don't know enough. It's not bad. It's entertaining. It's not like I watched Succession and before that, and I thought that was much better, like for a series. But
Well, I mean, if we're going to bring that comparison, then yes, Succession is brilliant. The Mandalorian is fine. Like, if we're going to do that, yeah. What I would say about The Mandalorian is basically, I think it's good enough for somebody to give it a shot. Mm-hmm. I would say if you don't like it after the first episode, then it doesn't strike me as one of these shows that you need to get into, that you need to let settle and get the rhythm of it. I think you're going to know pretty much off the bat whether this is for you or not, to be honest.
Yeah, well, There you go. But anyway, on terms of the Disney Plus streaming offer, what are your thoughts, Jim? Have you given it a little bit of look of what else is out there on Disney Plus, if that's your thing?
I won't be continuing with it after the free trial. I mean, I know there's lots of people want to watch all the Marvel films on it, and again, I've watched them. I've enjoyed like most of them, to be honest, but I don't really feel the need to be able to rewatch them at a cost of £6 a month. If anybody has done a free trial of Disney Plus for The Mandalorian or whatever, there's one film I would recommend on there, just a little bit off the beaten track there, because it also has access to National Geographic stuff on Disney Plus. There's a film which I saw at the Edinburgh Film Festival a couple of years ago called Science Fair, and it follows a group of high school kids, largely from across the States, but a couple from abroad as well, trying to make it to the International Science Fair. It's a really good little documentary, and it really highlights kind of like differences in resources across the states and like the different challenges these kids all face trying to do this, as well as showing their science projects, which are like unbelievably impressive. So if you're looking for something a little bit off the beaten track when you're doing your Disney Plus free trial, I'd recommend that. Beyond that, I'm not particularly taken with it. I don't think, and there's not any features on the service itself that I think really particularly differ it from something like Netflix or anything like that. If you've got kids, I'm sure you'll get more out of it, but beyond that, I'm not seeing a whole lot, to be honest.
What's making this, to me, it's kind of frustrating. I mean, I know this is old news, but the fact that you have Apple coming out, and you have Disney coming out, and you have Hulu. I don't know if Hulu's here, but it's just, how do you, like, you're going to have to sign up to all of these subscriptions in order to get anything these days. And now it's like, Star Wars and Disney, which is obviously things that young children, enjoy, are going to be required to go through this like paywall. And, it bothers me, to be honest. But I mean, I think Disney's always done that. They've always been trying to control their media.
All the different subscription services, it's a bit like old school American cable. It's like, meet the new boss, same as the old boss and all that, but
Yeah, well, I will take a look at Imagineering, the documentary, just Just out of curiosity, maybe the one on Epcot if there's there, just to have a little fun with.
I'll pass, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, love to hate. Anyway, Disney Plus Mandalorian, not too bad, is what we're saying.
Pe o insulă în Canare există un limbaj fluierat. Vei veni pe insulă și vei învăța acest limbaj.
Everything we speak can be whistled. If the police hear the language, they will think the birds are singing.
Okay, so the first film we're reviewing is The Whistlers. Mark, tell us a little bit about that film.
Sure. So it's a mixture of a kind of noir and a policier film by the, as previously mentioned, Romanian director Corneliu Porumboiu. It stars Vlad Ivanov, who's a regular face in Romanian cinema. He plays a guy called Cristi. He's a cop, but he has some illegal connections. And we're introduced to him as he is traveling to one of the Canary Islands, which is famed for a language which is done solely through whistling. It's called El Silbio, I think. And this is a means, it's been used by a group of the Spanish mafia. It's being used as a means to avoid detection by the police. So when people are whistling things to each other, there's a very complicated alphabet system transcription thing going on in it. And when they whistle, it'll sound like birdsong instead of just a plain, he's in the hotel room or he's in the hospital room, go and get him. It's not a complicated narrative, but it has a lot of joins in and out of the past. There'll be a moment where, just as the rhythm of the thing is telling you that we're getting to an important point, there'll be an interjection from a card with a new character's name and a new colour, and it'll tell us some backstory, maybe go back into the past to show how they got to that point. I can't say I fully enjoyed this movie. I have liked some of Porumboiu's movies in the past. His first film is called 1208 East of Bucharest, which is fantastic. And the movie this is most connected to in his filmography is called Police Adjective. The case which is set up in the final shot of Police Adjective is alluded to here. The main character in that film was also called Cristi, and another character is in the film too, played by the same actor 10 years on. So I wonder, because I think there might be some disagreement. I think Jim likes this film a wee bit, so please, Jim, tell me what was up.
Yeah, I mean, some of the context here that's probably needed is the fact that I've not seen any of Corneliu Porumboiu. Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
There we go.
I'm
There
not
we
even
go.
trying.
I haven't seen any of his other work. Is probably some context in. Now, as I understand, it's quite different, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really come into this with any expectations whatsoever. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think it's the best film ever. I think what it does, though, is it has this very interesting central conceit. The whole, the whistled language, El Silbo. Where you get sessions where Cristi is learning this, so he can communicate with his collaborators, and you get several different sessions with it, and you get a feel for that. It's a nice, unique hook for me into what is otherwise, it's quite a twisty film, but it's not anything that's particularly, revolutionary in the way it's done. It's also very keen to wink at the fact that it is a film. There's one scene in the film where quite literally a filmmaker interrupts proceedings because he's scouting locations or something. Is that on the nose? And then, there's a set piece that takes place on a movie set. It is actually in the story a movie set. So it's very much wanting to wink at these kind of like more conventional Hollywood sort of noir crime stories, that sort of thing. I think I just enjoyed it because it basically reminded me a lot of films that I like. One thing that actually reminded me of that I've not seen a lot of people talk about is Seven Psychopaths, the Martin McDonagh film that came out a few years ago, which I seem to be one of the few people who like that as well.
Yeah.
So, I kind of, I like that. It reminded me of stuff with multiple perspectives, which obviously probably goes back to Rashomon and things like that, but, things like Jackie Brown, Pulp Fiction, and these dissecting narratives. I think it hit a lot of my nerd centers, I think, really, in that respect. So I enjoyed it. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think it's necessarily revolutionary. I do think it was a very well executed film. I think it had some unique hooks. I think it's got a good sense of humor. And I enjoyed it a lot, to be honest. But, clearly, I'm sensing opposition.
Mm-hmm. I've read a few positive reviews of this movie, and they've all used phrases that I just fundamentally disagree with. And the phrase that often comes up is, what saves The Whistlers from being simply a genre exercise. And I'm like, well, there's nothing wrong with genre exercises. Like, genre exercises are how we know what the language of a genre is.
It's part of the reason I like it, quite frankly, I think.
Right, exactly. But I find... I think the genre is actually being condescended to a wee bit, and I think some of the plotting is a bit off for the way that the narrative is configured, that there's always one more bit of backstory you need in order to put the puzzle together. There's one piece of plotting in the first half hour where a character mentions something, I won't say what it is, but a character mentions something and you go, alright, so that's where the money's hidden. And it is. And you're like, oh, come on, like, you're meant to keep a certain suspension of... like a suspension of the conclusions. There's meant to be like a progression here, and you've just upended it slightly. It is playful. It is a playful film, but not as playful or as serious as the previous ones. And before this, Jim mentioned that maybe I wouldn't like this because I've seen other Porn Boy films and I've liked them more, and that is right in a way because he's a very philosophical filmmaker. His interests are in a mixture of epistemology, the philosophy of language, the philosophy of history too, and here the problem of verification and the problem of the language of philosophy is here too because of the whistling language, obviously, but it's couched within a narrative in which everyone is under surveillance all the time. And that completely flattens the drama of conscience, which was such an important part of Police Adjective and is why I enjoyed it so much. Here, everyone's just out for their own back, and everyone's just kind of spineless and put into positions they have no control over. And that is maybe why I feel the narrative has some very lazy beats.
Amanda, what did you make of it?
Wow, I mean, I didn't get any of that out of the film, to be honest. But yeah, no, I don't really. I did see that being a genre exercise, and that's what I got out of it. And I thought it looked pretty, and it was interesting in terms of the look and feel of it. But it really didn't draw me in terms of the story and the narrative, and I wasn't really that captivated by it. And I also, I think what's interesting about some of these genre exercises that we're talking about, at least there's a little bit of bending. It just felt a little bit like an homage, and I'd rather watch like a Jean-Pierre Melville film than watch this, Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't really worth my time. And unlike, I think, and I don't have much more to say other than, last time we did this, the film Emma really changed my perspective on, a director I didn't like some of his previous work, and I saw this gentleman's documentary, Infinite Football, at Berlinale a couple of years ago. And while I really liked the character and I liked the premise of it, obviously I picked to go to the film, I thought the film was just terrible and very bizarre, and I also found the guy more interesting than the way that the filmmaker directed it. And then at the end of it,
Porum Boyu's getting a right kick in here. We can't pronounce his name. We hate his films, honestly.
I also don't like him as a person, because he got up on a Q&A and somebody asked him, there was this Russian animation at the end of his film. I'm sorry, this is a review of his last film, but there was a Russian animation at the end of his film, and it was like there was a Q&A and somebody asked him in the Q&A, why did you put that in there? Like, what does it have to do with, Romanian football or something like that? And he was like, don't you know? And so maybe it was some sort of philosophical thing that I just didn't get, and maybe that's why I don't understand him.
I mean, the one thing I will say against the film, right, you know, because as tends to happen in these discussions, right, because I'm the one who likes the film, then automatically, like, you know, I'd probably end up pushing back harder in opposition. The only thing I will say is I do think the actual story, if you look at it, because it's chopped up and it's all over the place. Like, basically, you get, like, chapters according to what supporting characters basically getting the focus, or you're finding out their role in the story. What I will say is I'm not sure how much that really adds to it, if I'm being honest. You know, other stories I've spoken about in the films that I've compared it to, I think it added to the way that story was told. In the case of this one, I'm not 100% sure it really does. It really does that. If you enjoy that kind of mode of storytelling, as I do, I think you'll be okay with it. But I don't think it's a story that is particularly added to or subtracted from by doing that. It's really kind of the more unique aspects of it, and the fact that it's willing to wink at itself that I engaged with, I think. So I don't think it's a perfect film by any means. I think what's clear is I enjoyed it a lot more than the two of you did.
Well, I think you've taken criticism, though, sometimes of films that are all about the filmmaking, you know, films about films, like you really don't like the artist, if I remember. But why is this one particularly
Why are we bringing
much
the artist
better?
stuff again? That was desperate getting
left
in
field.
there. No, I mean, I tell you, but that's when it's... I mean, the case... I mean... And I'm genuinely not going to go on about the artist here, because this would be the third time on the show or something. It's more that for me, that's more when it's using it as a gimmick. Now here, I don't think it's being used as a gimmick, right? The hook of the film is not, it's non-linear, it's choppy, blah blah. I think that's a storytelling choice, which has not ended up necessarily adding that much. But that's not the gimmick of the film. The closest the film has to a gimmick is the whole whistling language thing. But I actually think that's quite, you know, it's quite an interesting, unique thing to bring to this sort of story.
That's one of the funniest things in the film is when they test it out for the first time around the hour mark, and he's on the top of a promontory whistling, and the language is translated in the subtitles, and you go, oh, this is great, because it's as though the voice is coming from nowhere. I kind of agree about the use of movies, because there's a scene where the prosecutor and Christie end up in a cinema together, and they're watching The Searchers at a particular moment, which kind of feeds back into the narrative. So, and also there is a very pronounced psycho moment, which I won't go into. But these aren't just winking at the film; these kind of say something about his not only his mode of making them, but also about that narrative too, because that narrative is the jumping in and out of certain time frames, the flashbacks and and so forth. That's the substance of film noir. And if it's a bit confusing, there's the famous story about Robert Mitchum on the set of Out of the Past, where he would go around the set saying, "Don't tell anyone, guys, but I think a couple of pages in the script are missing." And that kind of element of not being able to solve everything is part of the pleasure of watching a film noir, I think.
Great, and I have seen a lot of film noirs. I think I will choose other ones over seeing this one again. But Jim, you did see it twice, you said, because you saw it twice.
Yeah, but that's more to do with my lack of lockdown focus than it. It's not. That's not a comment on the film. It's more of a comment on my viewing habits now.
And
to be honest,
to his credit, I perhaps have a little bit loss of focus as well, and just didn't captivate me very much, to be honest. So, you know,
you'll be happy to know, Amanda, that Infinite Football is being released in the next month to coincide.
I know.
With this.
I think on Mubi or something. I'm really excited to see it again, especially the last 10 minutes. So, make sure that you check this film out if you like noir and Canary Islands, and I actually really like the titles too. I thought those were quite lovely.
I think this film had me on site because it does open with Iggy Pop's "The Passenger." I think it had me from there. Quite frankly, I think it knew its audience in my case. I think.
Yeah, I like the soundtrack. I like the look. I like the feel. I like a noir, a neo noir, if you will. But it's not my favorite. So The Whistlers has gotten 2 out of the 3 votes here, and it's actually going to be out later this week, May 8th, and on Curzon Home Cinema. So be sure to check it out.
I'm told I was a violent child. I can hurt people. Most people know to stay on the right side of the Devers family. I'm what you meet if you ever find yourself on the wrong side. People say they're trouble, the Devers.
I didn't get the joke, lads.
But I say all families have their problems.
I don't want him to be around you. Because of the things that you do.
Wise up, Arm.
Wise up.
Yeah, wise up.
You were never like this before, you know that? Before them Devers got their hands on you.
We heard about this fella.
But we think it's time to finish the job.
So the next film we're going to be reviewing is Calm with Horses. Is that correct? Calm with Horses, Nick Rowland. Who wants to tell us a little bit about that? Mark?
Sure, I'll jump in. So this is a film which follows a man whose nickname is Arm. His real name is Douglas, and he's played by an actor called Cosmo Jarvis. Set in a small town in Ireland, and he is sort of like the strong man for a notorious family called the Devers, and he's sort of kept on a short leash by the one of the up and coming members, whose name is Divna, who's played by Barry Keoghan. He's trying to find some money because his the mother of his child is trying to move their child. Her name is Ursula, she's played by Niamh Algar, and the son is called Jack. He has autism. I think he's 5 years old, and they're trying to get money to move him to a school in Cork, which would be better suited for his needs. The way that Arm is treated by the people around him is a mixture of like intellectual and emotional belittlement, and he's kept under control essentially by them until there's an incident within the family that needs to be sorted, and the head honcho asks that Arm essentially carry out a hit as quietly as possible. This may or may not go to plan, and what follows is then a story of retribution.
So I'm the other person who's seen this film here. I really like this. It's another one where I'm not convinced the story is necessarily, original or groundbreaking. I think you've seen this this type of tale quite a lot before. In particular, even with a character who, as Arm is the central character, a boxer or a former boxer. There's plenty cinematic parallels that you can come up with there. But I have to say, I think for what I believe is a first feature film, actually, in the case of Nick Rowland, it's really quite accomplished. I was really taken with the look of this film and a lot of the shot choices that he makes. In particular, right at the start of the film, we open on an act of violence from Arm, which, as Mark mentioned, sets the whole plot in motion. And just the way in which that is framed compared to when Arm is having more introspective moments, there's a very intelligent use, in my opinion, of close-up and medium shots versus wide-angle shots when Arm is going about his business for the Dever. Is it Devers or Dever family?
Devers, I think.
Okay, so it's the Deverses, not the plurals of tricky surnames. I think the central acting performances are really good. Cosmo Jarvis, I think, is excellent as Arm in that central role, and I think it largely depends on him. But I really do think it's some accomplished direction here, and then something that I said recently just after seeing it was, I don't really know what I was expecting going into this film, but there are a lot of intelligent choices, and well-executed ones as well. In particular, there's a car chase scene, which, in all honesty, is the best car chase I've seen in ages. It stands to reason, because apparently I found out that Nick Rowland apparently used to be a professional rally driver, so it makes a lot more sense after finding that out. But overall, I'm really very impressed with it. I think it looks excellent. I think it's well constructed. As I say, I don't think it's a revolutionary story by any means, but it's one of these things where I just think it's good storytelling. I think it's a well executed film. You are going to need to give yourself a couple of minutes to get into the Irish accents in this film, though, because my God, are they thick. There are some absolutely incredible Irish accents going on in this film. I think once you've adjusted to that, then as far as I'm concerned, you're all set.
I agree that the performances are great, and it's as a study of the actors, especially the young actors, although I think there are a couple of quite hammy higher up performances. The uncle Paddy,
the head of the Devers is.
Oh my God, that's a task to get through. But the younger performances are all, I think, very accomplished. Cosmo Jarvis has a bit of Brando to him, and the way that he's like constantly trying to emote but struggling. He has this fantastic, when he's being told off or being told to do something, he has this fantastic scrunched up face that he does, where you can tell that there's intense concentration going on.
He's also got that impressive, like his neck is as thick as the back of his head as well. He really sells the boxer look with that as well, I think.
It's true. It's the way the film frames his physique too, because he's so shy and quiet, but when he's needed, so decisive in action. That is a good contrast with the Barry Keoghan performance, which is more jumpy, more in your face, more confrontational. But I think the best performance here is by Niamh Algar, and that's unfortunate because her part is, I think, kind of rote and pat one. I think the destination of where she ends up is, I got kind of annoyed with this because, and maybe it's because I'm thinking in terms of where I first saw Niamh Algar, which was in Shane Meadows' The Virtues, the series last year, which she's so good in, and she has she's such an interesting role in that film as someone that series as someone who's basically just about uncontainable. Here, although her gestures are really interesting, although her line readings are fantastic, and although the chemistry that she has with Cosmo Jarvis as a scene partner is so obviously well developed, I found the role as written to be a massive disappointment in a film that had lots of other points of interest, but just decided that, not to develop her role to the same extent. There's also the usual thing about the gangster family knows, they always know, and there's a test towards the latter part of the film, which just strikes me as like not a very interesting narrative maneuver to start with. And I disagree about the direction too, because I think a number of those scenes have really, although they go for emotion or they go for a genre beat, they don't hit them, I think, with any accuracy.
Okay, see, I differ with that. I think, because I don't know, for my money, the beats it's trying to hit, they're not particularly, and this will sound like I'm damning with faint praise a little bit, and I'm not. They're not necessarily particularly complex, but I do think they're executed quite well for my money. I don't think this is because there's a lot of angles to this film. It could have gone down. It doesn't, because there is a similarity between the Arm character, so the main one, Cosmo Jarvis, and his son. There is some similarities there in terms of there's this illusion that they've maybe suffered from the same difficulties, and the son is part of the story is, as you said, they're trying to relocate him and care for him, and it kind of shows Arm's inability to deal with that. He's willing, but the skills and the understanding are just not there. They could have gone into that more, and the title basically seems to come from like one key scene where that happens, but it doesn't really linger on it. Now, it could have gone a slightly more abstract route with that. It doesn't. It goes a slightly more obvious crime drama led beat. I think it wears a lot of its metaphors on its sleeve as well. There's a lot of dog on a leash metaphors kicking around this, in particular one very, very overt one before that car chase scene I mentioned. So it's not necessarily, I'm not going to sit in here and say that I think it's necessarily the most nuanced film. I do disagree with the execution though. I think it executes them quite well. It's just I don't think there's necessarily huge amounts of depth below some of the better looking scenes, some of the key scenes that are needed to hit the plot beats. So I am going to disagree there, but I think I see where you're coming from.
There's that scene you just mentioned, which obviously where the title comes from, about the horse trainer, and Jack, his son, is on horseback being led around by Ursula's new boyfriend, new partner, prospective partner. The shot selection in that sequence struck me as going for a certain kind of emotional note and just missing completely. Because there are a number of films, I'm thinking of Chloe Zhao's The Rider and Valeska Griesbach's The Western, which use the metaphor of a horse for this interrogation of masculinity. This gestures at the same and misses, I think.
You see, because I think something that I'll draw an analogy with, which seems like maybe an odd one to draw an analogy with, is a film that came out, I think it was maybe a couple of years ago now. It was actually quite a long time ago. It did very well at the Edinburgh Film Festival. It was a film called Caliber, right? Now, I don't know if either of you have seen it or what you thought of that film. In some ways, it feels similar to that to me. Now, that film had a lot of aspects that I thought were well executed. I thought it looked excellent at points. There are beats in there which are trying to hit emotional ones or plot ones where I don't think they're complex. I don't think they're necessarily, if you wanted to sound unnecessarily harsh, you'd say they're not necessarily that interesting, but I do think they're well executed. In some ways, it reminded me of that. In terms of whether it hits the plot beats for you or the emotional beats, probably more importantly. Clearly, your mileage may vary based upon me and Mark in this conversation. What I would say is, if you like well-told stories with emotional investment, is definitely worth checking out. And I think the acting performances are great. The one thing I do agree wholeheartedly with Mark about is Niamh Algar's performance is excellent, and I think that's the only overt downside of the film for me. I think it is one of these roles where an actress, and I'm going to use that word deliberately right now, has been given a role and has made a lot more out of it than what I suspect is on paper. Yeah. She's brought a lot more depth to that and a lot more empathy to that role than I think there is. Now, in terms of the way the story goes, I think it maybe calls for that sort of role, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there couldn't have been more depth there. Fortunately, in the case of this film, Niamh Algar manages to bring it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And there's a scene where they go to a small diner, small cafe, bistro, whatever, and they order burgers. And there's this tiny moment, but it speaks so clearly to the life that they do and don't share, and maybe they want to share it. Is that he reaches over to her plate immediately. Arm reaches over to Ursula's plate, and he takes her gherkins away from her burger and puts them into his. And it's a lovely moment because you know that that's a routine that they've been through so many times, and that's just of the thing I mentioned earlier of good scene work.
Great. And when is that film coming out online then?
It's already available. So I know you can get it various places. I know for certain, I think it's on BFI Player, but it got caught in the lockdown, basically. It got a very, very short cinema run before the cinema shut. So it had another digital release just a short while ago. So you should be able to find it on most platforms, but I know BFI Player for certain has it.
Okay, great. Calm with Horses. Okay, so the next film that we're going to be reviewing is Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, directed by Eliza Hittman. Jim, tell us a little bit about the film.
So the film centres on two young girls, basically, who live in rural... well, it's not too rural, but it's Pennsylvania. And basically, Autumn, played by Sydney Flanagan, finds herself pregnant. After some build up to basically confirming this, and needs to pursue a abortion, which is not offered to her in her hometown, and you get some scenes basically showing the slightly lacking provisions that are offered instead. So instead she takes off with her cousin Skylar, played by Talia Ryder, to New York City in order to make use of the facilities across state lines. So it basically it follows them throughout that journey, really, from basically trying to do this under the radar without the awareness of their parents and the difficulties they encounter even when they get there, and basically all the hoops that they have to jump through and the difficulties that they face, mainly from men, is also a key part of this. It's kind of like the role or the lack thereof of men in this particular scenario. And it focuses on the two of them the whole time, couple of supporting characters, but that's what it does. It focuses on their journey from Pennsylvania, crossing state lines in order to try and get an abortion for this unwanted pregnancy.
And Mark, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought this was extremely well observed and extremely well acted. And the only other film of Hitman's I've seen is her previous one, Beach Rats, which is about a guy who presents it straight to his sort of typical Brooklynite bro friends, but is on the sly frequenting male sex cam services. And he keeps on saying lines along the lines of, I don't know what I want. And there's a similar line in this film where someone says, I don't know what I want to do right now. And both of these films seem to be about people going through a formative or identity formative experience involving sex to some degree and involving a taboo or a societal restriction around sex. And I'll say that Hitman's style, which is partly because she's working with one of the great cinematographers of the moment. Her name's Helen Luvar. She shot Happy's Lazaro and a number of other films. The way in which she calmly observes every part of the process, every step of getting not only to New York, but then within these different offices, and then there are these it's always another obstacle to follow, and the way that she documents this is so clear and sympathetic, and it seems to me that Hitman's films are, or at least the two that I've seen in this one, she's a director who communicates very clearly about people who don't communicate clearly themselves. There's the style of acting here, and Cindy Flanagan's absolutely fantastic. There's a central scene from which the title is drawn, which is absolutely heart-melting. It's extraordinary stuff. What she does is she's so constantly on the verge of tears. You can see the lip is just about to go. There's a little frown just above her eyebrows. And this sort of, I feel like I want to call this performance style recessive, and it connects to a brilliant essay written by Shawnee Enelo in the unfortunately soon to be shuttered film Comment called The Great Recession. And it's about the emergence of a certain style of pared down, internalized acting, and I think this could really be seen as like a not only a textbook example of that, but extremely sophisticated development of it too.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think what isn't said and what's in the eyes of these, particularly these two girls on this journey, and it could very much be as, like, oh, I'm spending 2 days in the city, and and I loved every element of their journey and where they were going, especially because I lived in New York, so I actually know where that arcade is, I think, and it's one of my favorites. But but knowing through that, the way that they're acting is so well done, knowing that this main story is so harrowing and so sad that she's having to go through this. It incredibly blew me away. I was moments I was sad and and horrified, but also moments where I was just loving spending this time with them. So I was so happy to see this film, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you. I think this is an absolutely superb film. It just captures so many little things very well, and it would be very easy for a film dealing with this sort of topic to be impassioned, in the sense that, a lot of very overt, out there emotions, and it does that far more, in my opinion, far more powerful thing of they are there, you can feel them, but it's all in what is not said. It's not to do with, great angry speeches or emotional breakdowns. It's all about trying to hold it together, really. Despite the fact that it's, rather than it being kind of like this seismic moment in the main character's life, and there's this huge drama that swirls around it. It's more this kind of like emotional death by 1,000 cuts almost. It's just like all these little difficulties they need to face and absorb and just try and keep going, despite the fact that this entire system seems to be against them. And that resides in the two central acting performances, but also the direction as well. I think one thing, on a slightly more flippant note, one thing it does capture beautifully is the fact that a lot of these public transport terminals in New York are like purgatory. I mean, honestly, like, it just looks like absolute hell on earth. Now, I know it did. Like my only real experience of one of them is Penn Station, which is, honest to God, it's just this fluorescent lit hellhole. And I think, and I don't know where it is in the film. I think it's maybe like the bus terminal, like the Port Authority.
They're in
or something.
Port Authority, yeah.
Yeah, right. And basically, it looks very similar in that regard. So it does get that across like really very well. And it's just all these little things add up. What is not said, the facial expression here, the fact that where they are just looks just the most unaccommodating, uninviting place in the entire Earth. It all adds to it, and that look that spills over into the clinic offices that Autumn finds herself in. It's just all these elements come together to just tell what is a very simple story very well. It's something I've said about a couple of films on the show, and even today I'll say it about another one. But this one, certainly the ones we're talking about today, this is the best visual storytelling in my view. It's the situations that the characters are put in, the way the story develops, and then the acting. It just all comes together to be absolutely spot on in my view.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's something too about when they arrive in New York and they go to the subway for the first time. There's that feeling which has been done in a million movies, but it's very particularly articulated here. It's about the whiz and the rush of New York, and it being such a contrast with the more sedate rhythms of Pennsylvania, where she's from. But then you need to connect that to the way in which there's just this pervasive air of enmity and sexism just everywhere she goes. And it's on the tube it's in Pennsylvania, it's in her work. There's a horrible moment cashing up, which is unspeakable. Just to think that that's an everyday thing is appalling. But then there's a moment on the subway, which is even worse, if you can compare them. And what you said, Jim, too, about the storytelling being just the best storytelling that we're going to see in the films reviewed in the show today, is so true, because those moments where she's in the clinic and maybe it's an ultrasound she's going for, maybe it's the first step of the abortion. There's a moment where she looks at a monitor and she can see the image of her baby as it's growing. There's a moment where LeVar's camera just moves from right of the screen to the left as she rolls her eyes away from the screen, and it's like, okay, she's made her mind up. Like that's it. And a similar moment where she's...
I'm pleased you mentioned that, because there's another shot that's kind of like a little bit similar.
Up to the sky.
And it's just like it's like we said, it's little things, but it's allowing the visuals to tell the story, and I think I really think the film does it superbly, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one of the key examples that actually stuck in my head.
And that thing about like the camera being the sympathetic observer when everyone else belittles her or just takes advantage of her.
Exactly. I mean, I agree, like the whole like you were talking about the subway scene. Even when she went up to the subway guy, like I was gonna tell her, I was like, oh, don't do that, because he's not gonna give you any information. And the way just trying to figure out how to get in and stuff. I mean, in some aspects it's like a travelogue. This is, New York is a scary place, and even my friend and I were talking 2 nights ago about those things that happen on the subway that you can't imagine they do, but they do, but it's the details and how that she's telling the story that is is really, really special.
Mm.
So when is this film out then, Jim? Do you know?
It is out on May 13th, I believe.
Okay, so May 13th, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. We all highly recommend the film.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So I'm here with John Watzke from the Ocala Drive-In in Ocala, Florida. Incidentally, only an hour or so from where I grew up. And for a time being, it was the only cinema in the U.S. to be showing new releases during this current COVID-19 crisis, and accounted for the entirety of the box office sales for the U.S. one week. Is that the truth? So you were the only box office
we were the only ones reporting box office reports for actually almost 3 weeks, because we were the only ones getting new releases. There was a few other drive-ins around the country that were open, but they were doing classic films and retro type films. So I had contacted a couple of these smaller independent film companies, since the larger ones have pulled their releases temporarily. And on one of my screens, I was showing some of the older, the new movies, and then the other screen, I was showing the older ones.
I saw that you were actually showing the true history of the Kelly Gang, which was actually playing at the Glasgow Film Festival. So is that one of the ones you're talking about, one of the new ones that you can show?
Right. We had Swallow, we had Resistance, now then the true history of the Kelly Gang, and now I have Wretched. All of them are IFC films, and but they're all new.
So tell me a little bit about the history of the Ocala Drive-In Theater. How long has it been around, and how long have you been running it?
It actually opened in March of 1948, and it closed somewhere around 2002, and was sitting here vacant for many a year. And in 2010, I found it, and we restored it, and opened July the 29th of 2011.
Well, how about you? You said you've been in the business for a long time.
Pretty much grew up in the business. My grandfather started as a projectionist in 1913. My dad was a projectionist. My brother and I were projectionists. Our sons were projectionists. And we were actually in the process of teaching my grandson when 35 millimeter film went out and digital came in.
Does the Ocala Drive-In obviously has digital, but what was that like? How you started it was started with digital, or?
No, actually, the first 3 years we were open, I was running with the original 1948 Brinker projector that was in here when it was built. And when digital came in at the end of 2013, November 2013, we switched it over to digital on one screen, and then 2 years later, I built the other screen and put another one back there. Yeah, the remodel was extensive because the place had been vacant for so many years. It had grown up in weeds and little trees, and the roof had a lot of damage on the concession, and all the drywall had caved in, and it was vandalized naturally, being vacant that long. But then the switch over to digital, it wasn't as much of a task, other than it's a $96,000 projector, which is, takes a lot to pay for that, But the conversion for that was a one-day thing to go from film to digital. We run on film on a Sunday night, and Monday the technician came in, installed the digital, and we opened that night with digital.
Around this time last year, I tried to run an outdoor cinema here in Scotland, and if you know anything about Scotland, the weather is a bit funny. It rains a lot. So how does weather affect? I mean, I know Florida has great weather, but in terms of when you can start a film or end a film, or does it affect your screenings?
It doesn't affect the quality of the picture on the screen, actually, at all. It does affect the customers coming, because naturally they have to run the windshield wipers on the vehicle. That affects the business tremendously. They'll come out in the heat, they'll come out in the Florida cold, if you can call it that, but they don't come out much when it's raining.
Tell me a little bit about your audience. I read something even before this crisis that you've really been growing a large audience of people who travel for that drive-in experience. And now, how has that maybe audience changed a bit?
Well, actually, the audience pretty much stayed the same, other than we're drawing people from a longer distance. My average customer base is couples from their early 20s to late 30s that have 2 or 3 children that either cannot afford to take them into a walk-in theater because of the expensive price, or wouldn't dare try to take the little toddlers into a walk-in theater. And we've always had people that drove from Daytona, St. Augustine, as far up as Tallahassee on a pretty regular basis, but now they're coming from all over. I mean, we actually had some last weekend. Several people were here from Atlanta, Georgia. That's a 7-hour ride. They took a road trip. That's how bad people want to get out of the house right now.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I know the feeling. So how has your audiences in terms of numbers, have you, like, did you do it like just on the weekend, or was it 7 days a week anyway?
Oh, no.
How's it grown?
We have always operated 7 days a week. We close for nothing. I mean, we're open 365 days a year. The old cliche, the show goes on, is not a cliche, it's a way of life. So it goes on. But right now, for this time of the year, we're doing better than we normally would do at this time of the year, because normally they're doing their proms, their graduation, their a lot of expenses, and final exams and stuff. So that usually slows things down about this time of the year for a few weeks. But right now, we're pretty much filling up on weekdays, and on Friday and Saturday, we're selling out and having to turn people away. But I am at half capacity right now because I've taken every other parking space and fenced it off with social distance.
Yeah, absolutely. And how has that changed the way that you can run? Do you need to prepare more, or is there more cost into your screening?
Yes, it is a lot more cost to it, because right now, like I said, we're losing every other parking space. Then for the concession, we have a walk-up window, which has got a little fenced-in walkway going to 72 feet long. Every 6 feet is marked off for the social distance with a little dim light, because at night you have to be able to see where it's at. And then we also deliver to the vehicle. As opposed to before, they would come into the concession and get their food, and basically most of it we would hand out to them on just a paper plate. Now it's all to-go containers, and everything's covered or wrapped good, and so we've got a lot of extra costs there. Plus, it used to be where most of my customers paid cash. Now they're all paying with debit card because they're ordering online. And so I'm absorbing that extra cost there. So we're doing more business, but the operating expense is a lot more than it was before. But everything we're doing right now is making certain that the guests are safe and my staff is safe. For instance, my staff, everybody wears gloves and masks. Okay, they have their temperature taken when they come to work. Before they clock in, their temperature is taken, it's logged, and 3 hours later, it's done again. The people that are delivering the food to the vehicle are told to, the staff inside puts it on the tray. The runners are told to take it directly to the vehicle, do not touch the packages, hold their arm out at full length, and let the customer reach out their vehicle and take their own packages off, so there's no cross-contamination. They return to the concession, they take those gloves off, put another pair of gloves on, and then take another tray back out. So we're going to every extreme that we can to make certain that everybody is safe at this time. Like I told you, my grandfather started it back in the family 107 years ago, but in the 60s, my dad worked for a company out of Louisiana that owned 297 drop-ins at that time. They were, they owned almost as many as there is in the country today. And he was a projectionist and engineer for them. And they had all of them in Louisiana, Mississippi, Southern Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. And I used to go from drive-in to drive-in with him when he did repairs or installation and stuff like that. And I just always liked the drive-ins, and always said I would open my own drive-in, and everybody kind of thought I was crazy, but I guess I am, but I'm doing it.
Well, I'm glad you have. And today, how many drive-ins? I mean, because I think I read something like there were 5,000 or more.
Yeah, at one point there was over 6,400. It's down to 305 now.
Wow.
And the biggest problem with the drive-ins is people over the years, back in the heyday of it, got to the point where they were bringing their own food and beverages and even to their popcorn with them to the drive-in. Well, you don't make anything off the tickets. You make about 20% of the ticket sales. That doesn't cover any of the operating expense. So by people bringing their own food, that put the drive-ins into a financial bind, and they started going to the lower budget movies to try to get a little bit more percentage, which naturally just cut their attendance down, and they finally worked their way out. But people need to realize that it's the concession that supports any theater, but mainly the drive-ins, because we pay two film companies a percentage of every ticket sold, as opposed to one, and our ticket prices are much lower. So that was a big hurdle that I've had here, trying to I call it educating the customer. Some people say I pound it in their head a little bit too much, but you always got new customers that have to understand why we need that concession sale.
Yeah. What do you think makes a drive-in experience
Well,
special?
the drive-in is more like a social gathering. Even now, with everybody's keeping their social distance, we have 12 to 16 feet in between the vehicles right now. People are still sitting outside their vehicle on their lawn chairs. The children are still running around, enjoying themselves. Before the virus epidemic come in, they were getting in the big field underneath the screen, and they'd throw frisbees and play ball, and with kids that didn't know, they interact. You talk to people, my generation, about an older movie, say in the 60s. If they've seen it at a walk-in theater, they will tell you, "Oh yeah, I seen that. It was a good movie," and that's pretty much the end of the conversation. If they've seen it at a drive-in, it's a memory. They will tell you what drive-in they seen it at, who was with them, what type of vehicle they were driving. It's a memory. The whole family's together. They're spending 5 hours or so at the theater. They're not cramped around people. If the children get tired, they lay in the back of the vehicle and go to sleep, and they can even bring their dog. So everybody's happy.
So you mentioned a lot of your audiences, families and children. Because it's affordable to bring a whole family together in their car. What kind of shows? I mean, I noticed you're having a whole Harry Potter week, which is really exciting. What kind of films do you tend to program that are quite popular?
Basically, I try to get any of the movies that the children like, especially animated. Animated movies seem to go very well here. I always do the animated movies when they come out, whichever one it is, and then I'll do something for the second feature that's more entertaining to the adults, but it's still appropriate for the children to watch if they decide to stay up. I have a game room too, so that a lot of times I'll just give the children some change and let them go into the game room, play games, get them out of the way so they can enjoy their movie. But I always go to the family-oriented movies, and especially kids' movies.
And has your experience with distribution companies, like you said, I guess there's less available right now, but has that changed now during this process,
Oh, yeah, it definitely changed, because all of your major film companies, Universal, Disney, Sony, all of them pulled their releases that they had scheduled for April, May, June. They've already pulled them and are either going to reschedule later down the line. Some of them they've already released on pay-per-view or DVD. So it's making it hard to get family appropriate movies, because most of your independent film companies tend to go to the lower budget and the horror type movies or stuff like that, and it's getting really hard. That's why I went with the Harry Potter this week, and I'm hoping that as more of the drive-ins open around the country, that the film companies will at least start releasing something family appropriate that we can take in, until they start opening all the other theaters.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you like for your business, for drive-in movie theaters all over the U.S. or whatnot?
Well, it has definitely brought a lot of exposure to my location here, but also drive-ins in general. I think it has brought a lot of exposure to it, and I think over this period, people are going to realize how much safer they are at a drive-in. At a walk-in theater, you're pretty much confined, so no matter what the catastrophe, you kind of locked in a spot there, and up against people. The drive-in is kind of, you have more freedom. It's like it's a big tailgate party. Okay, and you do have more freedom where you can move around, and if there was a problem, you can get out of the way or whatever. But I think in general, people are gonna realize, that they're different experience. It's a totally different experience, is what it is. You have a walk-in theater where you go in and it's a movie. You have a drive-in that you go in, you enjoy the movies, some company, and it's a memory. The drive-in theater is a memory. It's not just a movie.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And I know that when I can get back to Florida, I'm going to take my mom and come visit and watch it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, y'all need to come down and see it.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you.
And introduce yourself when you get here.
Okay. Will do. Okay. So we've come to this part of the podcast that we pick our favorite short films, and Jim kind of has it that we have to do it in a minute. That's the big challenge. So I'm going to go first, if that's okay.
I think Carice, who founded this segment, dictated the minute thing. Let's not.
Oh, right.
I am not that dictatorial, apart from the fact that we will absolutely stick to it.
It's just because I guess you had the clock in your hands, and now we can all see you timing us. So I will go first. And I doubt that mine's going to be any longer than a minute, because the film I'm recommending is only 3 minutes long, and it's called Chat Écoutant la musique. It's also by one of my favorite film directors of all time, Chris Marker. And I'll let you guys watch it. Really, I mean, I think it's called Cat Listens to Music, and it's that simple, really. And it's, I don't know, when I'm having a bad day, it kind of just pleases me to listen to watch a cat listening to music and from the 90s.
All right, sounds good. Well under a minute. Under a minute.
Don't want to give too much away.
Okay, well, I think I'll go second, and I'll start timing myself now. The film I'm going for has a little bit of continuity from one of our previous recommendations. So on the last show we did, Amanda recommended Urwali, about the mascot at Stenhousemuir Football Club. Martin Lennon, the maker of that, also made another film. Well, he's made several, but the one I'm recommending is called The Frying Game, which I caught at Edinburgh Short Film Festival in 2018, I think. And basically it goes to Stonehaven, and he basically films the reactions of people trying deep-fried Mars bars for the first time, and talks to people about the sort of like the phenomenon, which has become this curiously Scottish thing to identify with. It's a lot of fun. It's very funny. He has some fun with some of the transitions as well, and it's just a very light but also entertaining and informative short documentary.
Yeah, no, and also I think the DP on that was also the same DP that and our friend Stuart Edwards, who did Orwally as well. So it is a continuity there. Mark.
Okay, so the short one I'm recommending for sad reasons. Unfortunately, the filmmaker died last month, incidentally on exactly the same day as the Japanese filmmaker Nobuhiko Obayashi. The filmmaker is called Bruce Bailey. The film is called Valentin de las Sirias. It's 10 minutes long. It takes place in Jalisco in Mexico, and the filmmaker joined with a family of farmers there, and he films everything in extreme close-ups. He finds very askew ways of entering into their lives, either by filming the shadow of one of their horses or by traipsing through some foliage. All the time, or at least most of the time, there's a folk song which gives the film its title playing, and in visual terms, Bailey does what the folk song does for their lives generally, which is honours them, follows them, and in the end immortalises them as well.
Great. I guess we've done quite well this time, being under 1 minute, right?
Yeah.
I think that was 53.
It's not like that time you and Betty cheated with Lajete. We'll both do it, and we'll talk about it for like 3 minutes total. Yeah. That's how we'll get around it.
We're getting better. We're getting better at this. So we'll actually be putting the links to these films in the bottom of our description on YouTube and probably on our website and whatnot. So whichever way you're watching and listening to this, you can check out these short films. We highly recommend. So we're doing one new thing this time, which is, we do a lot of new releases and stuff, but now that we're on lockdown, or, we're relying on the internet we've thought about, let's go back and see films we maybe missed or as a group we'd like to recommend. So I've challenged the team to one person each time to pick a film, and that's easily accessible online, and that we could all watch together and come back and review. And it doesn't necessarily have to be new. It could be very, very old. Mark, I'm challenging you today to take us into next time, and we'll come back and give our review. So what do you have, what do you dare for us to watch?
Okay, this is a very heady proposition. I apologize in advance, but it is actually a completely fascinating movie, which incidentally I have watched, I want to say 5 times in 18 months, because I just get a few a wee while down the line and I want to be right back in there. The film is called The Task. It's directed by a photographer and conceptual artist called Leela Dare. It played the festival circuit in 2017, so it played Sheffield Doc Fest and True False in the States. Incidentally, it came out or premiered the exact same year as The Work, the film also about group therapy in a Californian prison, but the emphasis of this one is completely different, though in both films you'll find a quality of barreling right into the heart of a matter, and within 5 minutes there's some serious stuff analysed straight away. The only way I can describe it, and I won't describe it too much, is to say it's there are certain moments where somebody just tells the truth, and it's like watching someone adjust a Bunsen burner and the flame changes colour. It's absolutely electrifying. It's great. The setup for the film is that it's a Tavistock conference. It's using the Tavistock method, which is a method of essentially psychoanalysis set up by a British psychoanalyst called Wilfred R. Bion. And so they talk for 2 hours, and that's it. But the conversations are very very abrupt. It's very frustrating because there is no topic of conversation. Yeah, of course there is. There are a number of consultants in the room who are either medical professionals, counsellors, and they try... I have endless theories about this movie because so much of it is just wildly indeterminate, but that, like, the sitting with the contradictions that you have to in order to be in that room, even as a viewer, and this is really interesting in lockdown, I have to say. The way it's set up is that there are 6 cameras in the room, so they're framing the people speaking. There's sound equipment on the roof, on the ceiling rather, and these cameras are like catching either the person speaking or candid reactions to that person from other people in the room. It is extremely interesting material.
It does sound very interesting. I am a little worried about another lockdown film getting recommended to Amanda after I made her watch Vivarium for the last show.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a little bold on my review on that. I felt bad because it really was a good film, and I feel like they never forwarded or retweeted our stuff because it was like, why did you make me watch this again? But yeah, no, I'm really feeling the lockdown and on certain days, but like maybe on a good day I'll give this a whirl. Of course I will watch it because you dared me and you challenged us, and there will hopefully be some other people in our group that take the challenge as well, because I know that Jim and I will certainly. So that's it. That's all we have for Cinetopia, the second remote edition. Stay tuned next time where we don't know what we're reviewing yet, but we'll figure that out shortly. But let us know if you have any recommendations or you have any thoughts on this. You're always welcome to just write us on social media. We're at Cinetopia on Twitter, and we're Cinetopia Hub on Instagram, and Facebook. So we're always looking for other ideas in terms of things that we can do and other recommendations of films to watch. Anyway, that's it for us, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye-bye.